Mellody is an American businesswoman, named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people. As I say, she's the president of Ariel Investments, based in Chicago, and they have opened an office here in Australia. She's also the chairman of the board for DreamWorks Animation, a director of Estée Lauder and of Starbucks. She's an advocate for US financial literacy and investor education, something that everybody in this room grapples with and knows lots about. And later in the conference, she will be speaking again specifically on that topic. So again, I'd invite you to put questions on the screen here. It says ask a question. If you'd like to ask Mellody a question, you can type it into the app. And at some point, I'll bring the house lights up and there'll be roving microphones. So really have a think about what you would like to ask. And I will come to those questions. So again, make Mellody welcome. We're a long way apart.
We are.
We had a talk before and we decided that there's so many things we could talk to Mellody about. We could do an hour on her biography, we could do an hour on her experiences in the boardroom, we could do an hour on best management practice, we could do an hour on diversity, and we're going to try and ram all of that into 1 hour. So we'll see how we go. Let's start at the beginning. One of 6 children of a single mother, Dorothy Ashley, brought you up in Chicago, but you describe your mum as an entrepreneur. In what sense was she an entrepreneur?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. We're very excited to be in Australia. And yikes. And we've had such a warm welcome while here, so thank you for that. My mother was an entrepreneur in that she was in the real estate business. And so what she would do is that she would redevelop old apartments, oftentimes in not so great neighborhoods, and try to rent them or sell them to people looking for a place to live. And I've told people it was a boom or bust, but not much boom life, in that she was very early for her time. And there were lots of forms of things that made it hard for her to be successful, some obvious, some not so obvious. And at the end of the day, it led to a very tumultuous kind of upbringing, even though she was fantastic and did the absolute best that she could.
And when you talk about the bust times, how, as a little kid, what did a bust look like? Where were you?
A bust looked like being evicted or getting our phone disconnected or a car repossessed. Or my mother, I remember this a few years ago, it just came to me one day. I remember her going to the gas station and borrowing gas.
Borrowing it?
Borrowing. So she would say to the gas attendant, can you please lend me $5 worth of gas and I'll pay you back at the end of the week so that I could get to school. And I just thought about that. I don't know why it came to me a few years ago that, you know, what kind of person you had to be to go in that gas station and to ask. But she knew school was very important, and it was extraordinarily important to me, and she would do anything for me.
And what kind of person do you need to be to ask that question?
I think mothers understand, I think fathers understand, but I think you have to be very selfless. Because when you go in and say you're borrowing gas, you're admitting that you aren't doing very well, and that's extraordinarily hard. It's given me a tremendous amount of empathy for people who are really struggling, because I recognize how hard it is for them to have to make peace with their dignity in that moment.
And yeah, as well as being ambitious and optimistic, she had to be humble.
She was, but she was a dreamer.
Was she?
She was one of these people who thought anything was possible. She was convinced she would die very, very rich.
Yeah.
And that she would have this great life. And no matter what happened to us, she always had these big ideas and big dreams. And certainly I think some of that did translate to me in terms of me believing that anything is possible.
She told you this? Anything's possible, Mellody. You can do anything.
Be anything you want to be. No excuses. Make no excuses about a lack of success, because it all comes down to you. And so it became very clear to me the only way that that was possible was to get the best education I could possibly get. That was something that no one could take away from me, and then it would give me the capacity or the opportunity to do whatever it was that I chose to do.
And so I wonder where your drive comes from. Was it Mum saying, you can do anything while sitting in the dark? in the car if it hadn't been repossessed, saying, this is just a temporary setback, you can achieve anything? Or was it a desire to get past that insecurity?
I was desperate to get out. I tell people there's no accident I work in the investment business because I was desperate to understand money. That's why financial literacy means so much to me. My drive was, one, a function of my mother, who would say things like, if you slept past 6 a.m., the world was passing you by. And to this day, people know I wake up very, very early, and I live in a
What time did you get up this morning?
Today I got up just after 4, but I usually do.
Why?
Because I have a lot to do. Because I don't want the world to pass me by.
Oh. I reckon there are 2 types of people in the world. People like you, and I have a lovely friend who's a marathon runner, and she's my age, nearly.
I've run 4.
Do you? You run marathons?
I've run 4 marathons.
4 marathons. Yeah. Just excuse us. What times did you do per kilometre?
That's a really great question. My best time was 4:22.
Wow, that's amazing.
I wanted to do 4:15.
Did you?
Yeah.
And so you disappointed yourself. What's your fastest kilometre? How fast do you... Oh, you can
We
only
don't
12
do
miles. We
kilometres,
can't have that
so-
conversation. We'll move on. Should we move on? We move on. So you wanted to run past that sense of insecurity, and you wanted to make sure that I call it in my kids FOMO, fear of missing out. I don't want to miss out on what might happen after 6 o'clock in the morning. I want to engage with what is possible today. Is that the legacy of your upbringing?
I don't think it was a fear of missing out. It was, I have a lot to do. So missing out suggests that you are, in some ways, at the effect. Have a lot to do means that you're actually taking action and doing something.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe it's a nuance, but I saw it
it's a
very
big difference.
different, that I have a lot to do. And a lot to do based upon the fact that, there's so much embedded in that question. In America, I won the birth lottery, that I had this opportunity to have this unbelievable education. I had a mother who supported me despite the fact that we had a really tumultuous existence at times, that I got to work with unbelievable people, that I get to be on these unbelievable boards. And so as a result of that, I am like, I have to pay this forward, make sure that I am using all of this that has been poured into me, pouring into other people and pouring into other things, because this is a miracle.
You ended up, yes, I think that's worthy of applause. You ended up at Princeton, and you got a job at Ariel, and you have stayed, how long?
I've had one job. So I've worked at my company, one professional job, but that doesn't count when I worked at a storeroom and all of these other things. But I've worked at Ariel for 25 years, which is, in America, just very, very unusual. The average American supposedly has 11 jobs in their lifetime, most of them early on in their career.
And so John Rogers founded this company. What did he say to you at the beginning that made you think, oh, I could stay here, this is for me?
I knew I would work there forever.
Yeah?
I knew. I literally used to have these dreams where I'd say, how many times am I going to walk in this door? How many times am I going to be on this elevator? Because I knew that's where I was going to be. I knew it. John said to me on the very first day of my employment at Ariel, I was 22 years old. He said, there are going to be people in rooms that have very big titles and make a lot of money. It does not mean their ideas are better than yours. I want them.
I want your ideas.
I want your ideas. And that to me was a very, very powerful statement about being valued and the opportunity that was going to exist at this company that I knew just did not exist everywhere. So I knew instantly, I said, this is, again, another miracle. This is something that just doesn't happen. That you're sitting down with the CEO of a company. At that point, his title was president. We didn't use the CEO title then until I became president. Then he became CEO. Right. But back then, you're 22 years old, sitting down with this stock-picking wonderkin, and they're telling you they want to hear from you. It was unbelievably validating and empowering, and it made me know, again, here's an opportunity, don't blow it.
So you're 22 years old and you've had this upbringing and you've got yourself to Princeton and now you've got yourself in the door at Ariel, and John Rogers has said this to you, speak up, lean in. When did you first feel powerful?
Wow, I don't know. I mean, gosh, I don't want to sound lacking in humility, but I think I felt powerful as a child. I know this sounds crazy. My mother used to buy Easter dresses instead of paying the phone bill. And I remember being a child saying, I will never do this. This is what my life is going to be like. This is how I'm going to lead. This is what my existence is going to be like. It's going to be secure. And I was waiting for it to happen.
Yeah.
You know, there's a line in the movie Big with Tom Hanks where he says, I want to be big.
Yeah.
My mother said I used to say that.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be a grown-up.
And so you just imagined yourself into this life from the very beginning.
Right, so from that perspective, I knew, my power hadn't come yet because I was a child. But I knew, and I don't mean this again in any way that lacks humility, I just knew that if I could be in control, that I was going to be comfortable with that.
All around the conference centre where we see Ariel investment signs up, there is this turtle. It's a wonderful photograph of a turtle. I had no idea that if you looked at their little faces, there's great wisdom there. The turtle suggests patience. It suggests slow and steady wins the race. I would have thought, given where you came from and your ambition for yourself, impatience would have been a quality that was more likely to be found in you than patience. When did you learn to be patient?
Well, I certainly, I think I was one of these people who took a long-term view from the beginning. You can have a sense of urgency and still be patient. And that is what I am. I have a sense of urgency from the moment I wake up in the morning till the moment that I go to bed at night. But I am always thinking long-term about what could be, like being a child saying, I can't wait to be big. I had a long-term view. I wanted it to happen faster, but it didn't. But I wasn't impatient. There was a sense of urgency. I think at Ariel, we talk a lot about patience because in many ways people forget how important patience is. Again, the other thing John said to me on the first day of work, every game is won with patience, every single one. I'm a Formula One fan.
Really?
And I know you have the Grand Prix this weekend, which I wish I could see, but I can't. But you can't win in the first lap. Lewis can't win in the first lap. So you know who I root for. But when you think about all you in games and around the world, from cricket to soccer to American football to American basketball, you've got to play the whole game. From dating to, I could go through all the things where patience pays off. And what we say at Ariel is that patience wins. When I think people have most, in some ways, put a wrench in their own career plans, and I've even seen it in my own firm, it's when they were impatient. Something didn't happen fast enough. And I always say to them, if you just give time, you let things take time, that doesn't mean being, again, not having this sense of urgency, but just letting things play out in time. We're seeing that with the average American having 11 jobs, hopping around.
Yeah.
The one thing about working at a place for 25 years, I never had the perspective that the grass was greener on the other side of the fence. I was thinking about the fence, the side of the fence that I was on, and how to get better at it every single day.
And there's a question on the screen. At 25 years in the same firm, how do you maintain enthusiasm, drive, thirst for new ideas and innovation? Because it's flattering when someone comes and says, Mellody, we'd like you to come and run our firm, and they woo you, and it's, it's fun.
One, I've never been interested in that, and in terms of the wooing is not important to me. Again, maybe that's just based upon, if I needed another job, I'm 100% sure I can get one, 100%. Warren Buffett has this line that he says, do the job you would do if you didn't need a job. That is what I do. I don't need it to eat, but I love the work. Why do I love the work? I love the subject matter. I love the fact that we are actually changing people's lives. I once heard Charles Schwab say, around here we feel like we're curing cancer. That's how we feel at Ariel, that because of us, people can retire comfortably. They can send their kids to college. They can buy their first home, whatever it might be. That is terribly fulfilling. I mean, it really does get you excited about what you do. And the other thing about the passion for the work is I'm a part of the architecture of growing it and having this vision about what it is. And I want to see this vision fulfilled. The last part of what gives me so much enthusiasm is how rare we are in our industry. There are not a lot of people who look like me, and there are not a lot of companies like Ariel, which gives us this great sense of responsibility.
And when you say companies like Ariel, just explain what you mean there.
So we were the first minority-owned investment management firm in the United States. When we started,
first minority-owned.
So the first firm ever started by people of color in the United States, African American. When we started in 1983, we were the first. That is a stunning statistic, and you would think, how could that be? But it is. And if you still look at some of the strides we need to make, I know there's a lot of conversations here about diversity, which I'm so thrilled about. When you look at some of the strides we still have to make, we have a long way to go. And so as a result of that, when I talk about what keeps me going every day, there's a lot. Yes, I get to be chairman of the board of DreamWorks Animation. Of all the publicly traded companies in the United States, there are 2 black women who chair a public company board. Ursula Burns, who chairs Xerox, and me. That's not right. It's not because I'm the smartest African-American woman or one of 2 in the United States. It's because something's wrong with the process.
Right.
And so when you talk about what keeps you enthusiastic and engaged, it's that I have this platform of Ariel to be able to do this work that I think has profound possibilities.
So here at Ariel, you've got John Rogers, an African-American man who I read from the age of 12. His father didn't give him birthday presents and Christmas presents, he gave him stocks, which frankly, if you've got a 12-year-old boy in your life, is not a bad option because they don't need anything at that point. You buy him a basketball, a football, that's it.
He did not think that way at the time.
Didn't he?
He said it was a bummer.
It was shattered.
Devastated.
Really?
Yeah.
I had him with glasses on, watching the stock movement.
Well, John's father was a child of the Depression, moved to Chicago when he was very young, 11 years old, taken in by a kindly uncle, was committed to making sure his child understood money. So he gave John stocks every birthday and every Christmas instead of toys, and he said he'd run to the Christmas tree and the only thing he had was a white envelope.
Oh.
And he said
I love that present. I love that, but it's better than jewelry. Go on.
The worst part, he said, think of your friends at school, and they say, what did you get? And they'd say Monopoly or G.I. Joe, and John would say IBM shares. But he said, and it was a modest portfolio, but what his father did that was brilliant. In many ways, you could say Ariel was founded on this idea of financial literacy, was that his father allowed him to keep these modest dividend checks. And he said, when you're 12, there are 2 things you don't get: mail and checks with your name on them.
And he could cash them and buy the G.I. Joe.
So he said he was a 12-year-old with cash flow. If he wanted to buy a candy bar, he did. But what ended up happening is he became obsessed with the stock market. He started to reinvest those dividends. Ariel was a childhood hobby that became an obsession that became a company.
And then you walk in at 22 and he gives you the job and you end up president. And then you need a chief investment officer, and in walks a woman born in India called Rupal Bansali, and he makes her the chief investment officer. I mean, there are not many women leading global funds. Why did he choose her?
So John is the chief investment officer of the firm.
Right.
Rupal is the chief investment officer of international and global equities at Ariel. Technically, I made her chief investment officer.
Okay, so he gets no credit for that.
No, technically, this is the genius of John, where you give him so much credit. I came in one day and I said, John's 50% shareholder of our firm. Every single person in our firm is an owner. And I came in one day and I said, I met this woman, she's amazing, and I think we should launch international and global strategies at Ariel. This was 2011. We're on the cusp of the financial crisis. We had or the back end, I should say, of the financial crisis. 2008, we'd had the worst year in the history of our firm, and we were still recovering for that, but strongly, coming back very strong. And I said, this woman is a force. And I literally said to him, she's me, but Indian. Now, I say that sounds like I'm lacking in humility, but the passion and the energies that she had, that I know that I have, we literally said we had each other at hello, as that line goes.
Yeah, yeah.
And so,
and as she had won the Forbes International Investment Report, they had named her a global guru 2 years beforehand. So you weren't the only person seeing this.
No. She had a 20-plus year career as a very, very successful investor, which added into the very successful investment record that John had built at Ariel.
Now, she prides herself on being a contrarian, which very much fits with that Warren Buffett style of investing and very much fits with your own culture. Why is she so proud of that?
Well, we are all contrarians at Ariel, and it's interesting because people say they are, and you don't know until the rubber meets the road, until there are those gut check moments where you really do see what are they made of. Do they go with the crowd, or do they zig when others zag? Why we believe contrarianism is so important is just a very basic idea. If you buy the same stocks as everyone else, you get the same results. We want to have different results, and obviously, we want those results to be better.
And how do you do that?
You do that by having a very disciplined investment process that focuses on patience, taking a long-term view, weeding out the noise of what you hear on a day-to-day basis, and trying to look at the essence of the company and what it's capable of.
She gives an example in a video on the website. She set her sights on Japan rather than on emerging markets some years back, a decision that paid off in spades in 2013. Why is that a good example of what you're talking about?
Because at the time, there was no Abenomics. People were thinking of Japan as being not an emerging market, but a submerging market.
Sure.
She was not doing a top-down, let's go invest in Japan, but stocks were revealing themselves as being very much ripe for recovery and undervalued, and there was value off in clusters. Value clustered in Japan, and that created an opportunity for her. And despite what the prevailing view was, which is that Japan is dead money, she ended up overweighting Japan, and that ended up being one of, interestingly, not surprising because stocks trade based upon fundamentals. The fundamentals were strong. It ended up being one of the very strong areas of the market over those years, and we benefited dramatically from them. Conversely, we were underweight emerging markets when everyone was saying, are you kidding me? You know, China's going to own the world. India, they're buying everything hand over fist. And she was very concerned about a whole host of issues, from governance to political risk to valuations, and shunned those areas, not out of any kind of lack of interest in the countries, but just saying the value isn't there.
We have a question on the screen. Can we just flick back to that previous question about quarterly reporting? Oh, we'll come to that. It was a question about staying the course, essentially, when you've got quarterly reporting, when you've got people maybe with itchy trigger fingers saying, oh, I've got to back you for the long term here. How do you keep members informed and calm?
Well, I think that's something that is extraordinarily important, and I think that's a challenge that we have in America, and I think from everything I've read, it's a challenge that exists around the world. The velocity of money has increased dramatically.
Yeah.
So if you look at just things like fund ownership in America and how that fund ownership has decreased pretty dramatically, you can see patience is being thrown out the window. And if anything, we're being more reactionary than we should be. And it goes against everything that is intended with a defined contribution plan, that you're buying every couple of weeks or every month, and sometimes when the market is low, sometimes high, and over the long term, averaging a better price. You're not supposed to be timing and trading around this. So how do you do a better job of getting people off of the quarterly story? One, I would say first and foremost is education, giving them the history so they can understand over the long term what happens if they're patient. So we always go back to the stock market has outperformed all other investments since 1926. And then we show all of the dramatic moments that have happened around the world and how the stock market performed 1 year later, 2 years later, to get people a bit more comfortable with the volatility that is just normal. It is something to expect, know it will happen, and know over the long term the volatility does dampen itself, and it may look like this up close, but over the long term it looks like this. So that's number one. Number two, what we think is very important is making sure you don't fall into the trap of the short-termism in terms of the conversation. So you're writing to members, we're writing to investors, telling them how we're doing, and we're always focusing on the long term. We have clients, it just happened to me very recently, who wanted a monthly conference call. I said, patient investors don't have anything to talk about every single month.
Right. You said no.
No.
How much did they have invested with you?
They had a lot of money, and it had been a client for a long time. And I said, listen, it is not aligned with who we are and what we do. And I said, the honest answer, we won't have anything to say to you every month. And it won't be a good use of time. And I don't want to play a monthly performance game because I don't believe in that.
Do they still invest with you?
They still do. You know, as Warren Buffett says, there's nothing even magical about a year. He said there's nothing magical about the sun circling the earth in terms of the performance of a company or a portfolio. Sometimes it could be 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Some of the best managers on the planet have had these periods where they've been out of favor, and if you terminated them on these quarters or 1 year or you can lose a lot of money. So we also try to show people the benefit of taking that long-term view in terms of the return that they get.
Another question on the screen, there's currently a lot of focus on fund management fees. We heard it from the assistant treasurer in that video. Fees being too high and eating into member returns. What's your view of investment fees? Is there room for fees to come down?
So I think the fee discussion is not a uniform discussion in that I think there are certain areas of the market where fees are very high, and interestingly, they're in the alternative space, and specifically hedge funds. And the reason that I say that is the hedge fund promise was strong absolute returns. Then '08 happened, and then it was all about relative returns. We lost less. Well, you were paying a very high fee for a strong absolute return, which didn't occur, and now there's a different perspective about what those funds may or may not do. And so there I say, why are people paying that much? We had a very interesting situation once where we had this client. It was a union, and we were doing a presentation, and it was a really tough meeting. I mean, brutal. And I say this was a client who cared a lot about the returns, and they wanted to make sure that their members were getting the best returns. And it was a brutal meeting. We were up about, don't quote me exactly on the amount, but around 23, 24%. And our benchmark was up something like 26 or 27. And the client was coming at us for having underperformed for the year by those, couple hundred basis points. And we said, well, listen, it's interesting. We're value managers. We usually don't keep up as much in a roaring bull market, which it was at that moment. And so we actually feel pretty good about 24%. We're not making excuses, we're just saying relative to what you should expect from us in this kind of hot market, we've actually held our own pretty well. After us was a hedge fund manager. They were up 8.
Wow.
Their benchmark was up 4, and they were getting high fives. And we were like, they paid 2 and 20, they're up much less, they're giving them high fives, and they're yelling at us. Something's not right here.
And what was going on?
Well, it was because relative to their benchmark, they had outperformed by 400 basis points. Relative to our benchmark, we'd underperformed by 200 to 300. And yet, when you looked at the fee differential, we were literally like, we don't understand this. So we would say that, I would argue that I do think some fees are too high. I do think on the long-only side, I think there's been a lot of fee pressure and fee compression. I think people have, negotiated very hard about fees. I think managers also want to make sure their fees are competitive, 1, so that we can win, and 2, because we recognize that it affects our return. And we want the highest return we could possibly have. Every basis point does count.
And how hard was it to have that conversation? You were talking about that Ariel did it tough through the GFC. The flagship fund fell almost 50%, is that right?
Our flagship domestic equity fund, not Rupal, interestingly, hadn't worked with us then when she was managing a IFA portfolio, and her portfolio outperformed pretty dramatically by a couple thousand basis points.
Right. So what did you learn during that period about that issue of what did you learn yourself as an investor, and what did you learn in terms of how to communicate in tough times?
I learned a lot. So for as horrible it was a gift. And I know that sounds a little odd, but it made us so much better. It made us so much better as investors, and we did things to improve our processes, which have led to very, very strong results. So that's great. Personally, the story that I tell is that I'm on the board of Starbucks, and Bill Bradley, he ran for president, famous basketball player, former US Senator, is on that board as well, and is the reason I'm on the board. And we were at a meeting, and it was very late at night, and I was on Midwest time as opposed to West Coast time, so I was, really tired. And we were leaving our dinner, and he said, "Sit with me in the lobby."
This is Bill.
Yes. So I didn't really want to do it, but I felt like you don't say no. So I sat with him in the lobby, and he looked at me. It was in the middle of the worst. And he said, "Mellody, are you scared?" And I started crying like a baby.
Oh.
In the middle of the lobby, the Fairmont Hotel in Seattle, tears just running down my face, like an ugly cry, not a little whimper, like, that kind of thing. And, I'm this adult sitting in a lobby crying. And, I don't speak. And finally I say, "Yeah, I'm scared. Like, this is my whole life, my whole career. We're underperforming. We feel bad. And I don't know when it's gonna end." And he just punches me in the shoulder. He's like, "Okay, see you tomorrow." And I was like, "What? You've left me for dead here. What are you doing?" And he said, "I wanted you to say it, and now I know you'll be fine." And I tell people, I mourn the loss of the assets, the performance, everything in that one moment, and I woke up a completely different person, and I said, "There's a hill, we're taking it." So what I learned was to confront your fear and admit it.
And did that
Which
help?
type A people and people who think of themselves as being really tough, we're not coded with that. And I told our team, I went back and I said,
See, this is not so far from your mother borrowing $5 for the gas, is it?
No.
So then you go back to the office, and what do you tell the people? I've had this revelation.
Well, it goes with another story. The other story was woke up 500 points down in the markets. It's 4 in the morning. The global markets are just getting crushed. And I'm breathing hard. And I talked to my now husband on the phone, who was living in San Francisco. And he says, "Mellody, what do you know when you're from Chicago that very few people know?" I'm like, "I have no idea."
I'm watching the market. I'm not feeling good.
He says,
Why are we having this conversation?
"What do you have in Chicago?"
Huh.
He said, "You have snowstorms." And he says, "And when you're in a snowstorm, what do you know? Never look up at the storm. You only watch your feet. Because if you look up at the storm, you fall. And if you watch your feet, you get from one place to the other." So I went to Ariel that day and I said, "We're watching our feet. We just have to get from here to here and there to there." And I did it in months. It was in the middle of May. The market had hit its worst point in April. And in March 9th of 2009, it was May at that point. It was still not feeling good. And I said, "We just got to get to November." And the whole office is like, "What's going to happen in November?"
Yeah.
I was like, "If it's not better, I'll pick another month."
And did you tell the people, your clients, the same story?
I told our clients that we were sorry that we disappointed them. I felt a lot of responsibility for clients who left because I felt like I didn't do a good enough job explaining it. This was actually the key to a really great partnership between John Rogers and me, because I run the firm, he oversees all of the investments. And he was saying to me, "Mellody, I'm sorry we've underperformed." And I was saying to him, "John, I'm sorry I didn't explain it well enough that they wouldn't stay." Isn't that great? Neither one of us was blaming each other. We were trying to, we took full responsibility for what had occurred. And I didn't think that it was about the stocks. I thought I wasn't good enough at writing and communicating to them about why this is a bad decision of leaving. And he was saying, I didn't do a good job of protecting us on the downside. And it was a fantastic thing in so many ways, because our team was so aligned. The example that I have given to all of our clients, I said it was like your mom being in intensive care. It's a terrible thing. And when your mom is in intensive care and you're in the room, crowded in the room with your family and siblings, you're not arguing.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a solemn and a calm. You may be terribly upset and scared, but you know it's not appropriate. And during that time for us, it was just calm. People had this sense of frenzy or chaos inside of investment firms, and we were calm. And that's what I did. I tried really hard to communicate to our clients at that time and to investors that this was time to stay calm. I love the quote that Jack Bogle from Vanguard had, where he said, "Don't do something, stand there."
Right.
You know, we always think, don't stand there, do something. He said, don't do something, stand there.
My other favourite one around that is hurry up and wait.
Right.
Yeah. That's good in public hospitals. I'll got another whole story there just from last week. There's a whole lot we could discuss from here on out. We can talk about diversity. We have some great stories there. I want to talk to you about secrets from the boardroom, why you're on these other boards. But I don't want to dominate this conversation. We've got 25 minutes left. What say we turn up the house lights and we find out where the microphones are. And can you see there's one microphone down here? Oh, look, they flash. You can buy those at the Royal Easter Show. There's two at the back. Why don't the people from the back walk down those stairs a little, and the people on the sides, turn on your flashy thing over there, please. Go on, I gave you a flashy thing. There you go. So, any questions around what we've discussed so far, or any other question that pops into your mind? Now, Mellody, Australians are not Americans. You have to just wait.
We're patient.
You have to be patient.
And the turtle.
They have questions. They need to know I'm serious, that I'm not just going to keep babbling on.
Yes.
There we are.
Hello, Amanda Derham. Thank you very much for your presentation today. Very, very enlightening. What is your most successful method of communicating patience to customers?
Your most successful method of communicating patience to customers, investors, clients?
Long-term returns. That's the most successful thing that we keep leaning on.
Show them a graph.
Right. Everyone is focused on the here and now and what is going on in the near term, and we keep focusing on the long term. We wrote a letter to our clients, and it was something that was very, very effective, where we talked about the fact that when we go into all of our client meetings, everyone says, what's our outlook for the market and what is the market going to do this year? And if you ask that question of Warren Buffett, he does not answer it. And we say, we have no idea what the market will do this year. But we wrote a letter that said, here's the interesting thing about time. In the investment world, we are more certain about what the market will do over 20 years than what the market will do over the next 20 months. And because we can look at history. And so for the S&P 500 in America, you can look at rolling 20-year returns on a 365-day basis over 20 years, and there's no 20-year period where the stock market has been down. The S&P 500 has been down. It does not exist, which is why when we convey this idea of long-term, we can say to people, we actually have more certainty about the next 20 years than we have about the next 20 months. So a lot of the ways that we try to convey this idea of patience is to constantly talk about the long-term. So even if we're reporting quarterly results, which we have to do, we immediately pivot to the long-term results, just as a constant reminder of what is the game that we are playing.
Now, other questions? I'm struggling to see those mics too. There's one down the front there. There's the ones from the back that folks won't turn around and look for you. So maybe come halfway down the auditorium. There we go. Now we've got other questions. Can we see other questions in the room?
Hello.
Yep. Sorry. There we are.
Hi, I was very interested when you said that you hired your Chief Investment Officer because she reminded you of yourself. Part of the problem that we have across all industries in getting greater diversity is that the ruling paradigm tends to select people who remind them of themselves. Have you got any comments around that?
That's a really fair question. However, let me give you a bit more nuance. Rupal grew up in Bombay. She went to school at the University of Rochester for business school. She started her career on the sell side because she started working during the 91 recession. She started her career in hedge funds, working for George Soros, and then went to the long-only world at Oppenheimer and then at Mackay Shields. Her experience growing up in an emerging market is very, very different than my experience growing up in America. So where she may remind me of myself in some ways, we are very, very different in terms of how we come to be where we are. And when I sit with her, which is what I love so much, and we do have a lot of things that we share in common and a lot of core values and beliefs that we agree upon, we have some dramatic differences in how we see the world as well. That makes us better at Ariel, and we, instead of rejecting those dramatic differences that we have, we actually respect and recognize those about each other. So for example, Rupal's office in New York, you could hear a pin drop. Every door is closed. There's no paper. They don't print anything out. Everything they do is electronic. At Ariel in Chicago, it's a very lively setting, and we have no closed doors at all. And I joke with people at Ariel in Chicago, if the door is closed and someone's in my office, they assume something's very wrong. So when people say, can I close the door? I'm like, you don't want to do that. So yet, these two cultures, which are very different, coexist because I understand this is the way she likes to work. So I joked with her one day, someone came to me and they said, the Ariel culture is not a closed door. Why do you let them have closed doors in New York? And I said, because I never want the person who is in charge of billions of dollars to tell me I'm the reason she did not succeed. Because I overlaid some rule or some edict that did not let her be her authentic self and be as successful as she could be. So even though I give the energy reminded of me of her energy reminded her of me, her way of doing things is very, very different. I mean, very.
And is a key to your position on diversity that you just don't pretend that me as an Anglo-Australian woman and you as an African-American woman and you and your Chief Investment Officer of the Global Fund, we're all the same. We're not. We acknowledge our differences rather than pretend there is some kind of equality that means we're the same.
So one, I did a TED Talk about this and I called it being color brave instead of colorblind, because everyone talks about being colorblind.
Because that's more acceptable, isn't it? Not to say, hey, we're different.
I want you to see the color. I want you to see the differences. I want you to accept and embrace them. So
but what if that makes me feel uncomfortable? Because I'm not supposed to point out that we're different, or that me and the Indigenous person are different, or me and the Indian person are different, because that undermines the equality.
I actually don't think it does. I think it enhances it. So the example that I give, I swim. And I have this swim coach who has me do this drill where I have to swim to the end of the pool without taking a breath. And if I don't make it, I have to start over. And the first
How long's the pool?
25 meters.
Phew.
So the first time I did it, I couldn't do it. Single time I took a breath, he made me start over. This went on for 45 minutes. And I finally made it. I got out of the pool. I was in a bad mood. And he said, Mellody, this is not a breath-holding exercise. I said, well, what is it? He said, it is an exercise to make you comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's how most of us spend our day. So these uncomfortable conversations, I have become very comfortable with them. The example that I gave yesterday is our firm is liberal. I mean, we're a liberal organization. And I know it's reversed here, like conservative is liberal. And so we're, I guess, conservative but liberal in your world. Liberal in terms of our ideas about humanity and society and giving back and philanthropy. And yet, we have colleagues in our office, whereas Barack Obama had his first few days of being president-elect at Ariel because he didn't have an office. We have colleagues in our office who are hardcore Republicans who have completely different views, completely. We're not arguing about it, we're actually accepting it because we say, if we're trying to solve really hard problems, which is exactly what you're doing when you're investing or running any business or running these giant funds that you're running, we want everyone's ideas around the table. We want to understand and know what they believe and what they stand for because it might affect the decision that we make. So we want those colleagues in the room with us. That's based on a book by a gentleman named Scott Page called The Difference that we all read. He was the head of the economics department at the University of Michigan, and he came up with the first mathematical equation for diversity. Some people say he could win the Nobel Prize because of this. And his work says if you're trying to solve a really hard problem, you want disparate backgrounds, experiences, even intellects around the table. And the example that he gives is the smallpox epidemics when it was ravaging Europe. And he says the best scientists in the entire world were brought together to try to crack the code on what to do about smallpox, but they were stumped. And the person who led them to the bovine-based vaccination for smallpox was a dairy farmer who noticed that milkmaids were not getting smallpox. Now, one would argue he probably did not, I can't say this for sure, have the same intellects as the greatest scientists in the world, and yet he saw something they could not see. So that's a clear example of diversity, even if it was intellectual diversity. And so that's why we keep saying when we talk about diversity, some of these uncomfortable conversations are uncomfortable, and managing a diverse environment is harder, but the outcomes are greater and better, and all of the data shows it. You can look at it with diverse companies in the US and here. I've looked at the data here as well. They have better performance, and they've quantified that performance in America. They said that for every 10% that a executive team becomes more diverse, it is equated to 0.8% in EBITDA. So people have actually done the math. And as I like to say, math has no opinion.
Can I ask you that TED Talk you referred to where you talked about colour brave and not colour blind? You started that speech with an anecdote about what happened to you and a friend. And the friend was running for the US Senate, and you go to this high-powered meeting in Tennessee. What happened?
New York City.
It was in New York City?
New York City.
Get out.
My friend Harold Ford was running for US Senate. He called me, African American, and as you may or may not know, we have 100 senators in the United States, and currently right now in the entire US Senate, we have 2 people of color, no woman of color. And in the history of the United States Senate, there's only ever been one black woman US Senator, ever. Just FYI. So, he's running for US Senate, and at that point, there was only one person in the US Senate of color, and that was Barack Obama. And he said, Mellody, I desperately need to get some national press. Do you have any ideas? And this is back in the mid-90s. You know, we're pipsqueaks. And I said, I have a friend who works at a media company. Let me call her. And I called her, and I said what we were trying to do. And she said, listen, fly to New York. I'll have an editorial board lunch for you for all of our people, and you should come with Harold because you're in business and it'll bring a different kind of legitimacy to the conversation. So Harold and I meet in New York, and as I joke in the TED Talk, we look like shiny new pennies. Like we've got our best outfits on. You know, this is where your mom goes like this. You know, we're this. You know, we're really sort of buttoned up. We're going to an editorial board meeting, which I've never done in my life, and I think this is a really big deal, and so does he. And we get to the office, and we get to the receptionist, and we say, we're here for the lunch, and she says, follow me. And so she proceeds to lead us through a series of corridors, and we haven't seen each other. He's flown in from Tennessee, where he's running for Senate. I have flown in from Chicago, and we are just, you know, talking to each other back and forth because this is our first moment of seeing each other. And we're engrossed in conversation and catching up when we realize all of a sudden she's opened the door and we're in this room, and the room has nothing in it except some tables and that are leaning against the wall and chairs. And she turns to us and she says, where are your uniforms? And we skipped a beat, and we're like, no, we're here for the lunch. At that moment, my friend has knows that we're in the building, realized we've been taken on this detour where the staff who's serving the lunch has been.
So they think that you're the wait staff?
They think we're the waiters. So my friend runs into the room and she says, I mean, literally, she's a Caucasian woman. The blood has drained from her face. I mean, there are no words, right? So she looks at me, she doesn't know what to say, and I just look at her and I said, now don't you think we need more than one black person in the US Senate? And Harold and I, we still joke about it. I mean, we're literally, so when I did my TED Talk, if you happen to see it, few people have made the connection, but I'm wearing a uniform. Now, it's Valentino, but it's black and white, and it was my nod to that moment of the uniform.
So why would a powerful woman start a TED Talk choosing to point out a moment where someone attempted to render you powerless?
Because I wanted to show that we all experience it. And that has nothing to do with your station in life or how much money you have or what title you have on your business card. That is an endemic issue in America. And I've wanted to highlight that if I'm not willing to speak to this issue, then no one is. Because I'm about as secure and as comfortable in my position and station in life in our country as anyone. And so I felt that I had this responsibility then to speak out about this issue, admittedly one that makes people very uncomfortable. I was in the green room before the event where they are dusting you off and make sure you're not sweaty and giving you the last minute tips about the TED Talk. And there was another woman sitting at a table and we were going one after the other. And she said, what is your talk about? And I said, race. And she said, grace? That is a super topic. And I said, no, race. And she turned away.
Wow.
In terms of something that makes you very uncomfortable. She didn't know what to say. So that's when I knew I was actually having the right conversation.
You and I had a brief conversation earlier, and I was reflecting that I went on radio the other day with a Malaysian Chinese American woman called Stephanie Fu, who's a producer for This American Life, which is an American radio program, and she was talking about what to do if your workplace is too white, and I said to her that I have recently. I knew I'd get a plug-in for my radio show, just stand by. Recently, I was appointed to a position at the ABC on Radio National between 9 and 10 a.m, a program called Life Matters that Geraldine Doog started many years ago, and now I present this program 3 days a week. And I was thrilled. I was thrilled because nobody's recording this, are they? 20 years nobody would forgive me for going to work for Channel 9, and I'm finally forgiven. The boys are forgiven a lot quicker when they go to commercial television, but I'm not bitter. And that's important. And I said to Stephanie, you see, the problem is, I'm thrilled I got this job, but they shouldn't have given me this job because I'll get there, I'll be all right, I'll find my way in the world. But when these jobs come up in a public service environment, and they only come up every 20 years because people stay, then you need to find from the ready pool of people who are out there a more diverse woman or a more diverse man so that the ABC starts to look like Australia. And there was the most almighty backlash from some of my colleagues in the media, not just at the ABC but outside of it, going, you're going to put us all out of a job, people who look like me. Somebody rang up and said, I'm not listening to this white-hating anymore, this self-hating white stuff, I'm going to go listen to 2GB, which I'm sure would make them happy because that way they don't even have to listen to a woman, let alone a white woman. Am I right? Or am I just a self-hating white woman?
I don't know you well enough to know if you're self-hating, but what I would say is you're very rare. So to call out the facts and to say that there are a lot of me and there are not a lot of others, and to say that without fear or anxiety, I think is very, very rare. I mean, if you look at what's going on in America right now, which is just a debacle of epic proportions.
This is Trump.
It's all about otherness.
Okay.
They're taking from you. So the idea there is that diverse person, maybe it's gender, maybe it's sexual orientation, maybe it's race, maybe it's age, whatever that diversity is that is not represented, that diverse person is leading to the possibility you can't be as successful. I reject that notion because I do believe that diversity ups the game. So it makes you better, and it makes me better if we can compete against each other and if the field gets open. Jesse Jackson has a saying that in America, baseball was not as good as it could be until Jackie Robinson could play.
Right. Meaning
that if you were only picking white guys, you had one talent pool, but if you were picking from all the best baseball players, there was a Negro League that was a separate and distinct league. If they were included as well, the game just went up. And when you add in American Dominicans and you add in Cubans and everyone else, the game has gotten better and better because the talent is there. But if the smaller the universe, I mean, it's like, do you want to be a big fish in a small pond or or what? So I think that you aren't wrong. I think that what you are saying instills a great deal of fear and anguish in a lot of people.
And so to the last two questions on the screen, what are your thoughts on improving diversity, gender, age, ethnicity, and why are there still so few women in financial services, just in the 4 minutes?
So I know there's been a lot of conversation in Australia about quotas, and in America, our version of that is called affirmative action, and there are some people who are very much against it. It's interesting, you are farther along than we are in terms of board representation and even in your C-suite in terms of gender diversity. I haven't seen a ton on ethnic diversity in terms of the data I've tried to read before I came here, but I would imagine those numbers are low. But what I have said is I do think you've mandated some things that have made a huge difference, and I think that's been remarkable and beneficial. I also think, so mandates, I'm not saying that, that the mandate should divorce itself from qualifications, because I don't believe in that at all. But I do think that one way could be mandates. The other way, which mandates are not accepted in America at all, is tying people's compensation to an outcome. You get what you incent. If you incent diversity, you will see more of it. It always is amazing to me where CEOs talk about how they're desperate to have a more diverse workforce, and they talk ad nauseum about it and they write about it. But if it were earnings, they don't go on lamenting about how that doesn't work out. Because that's really important to their future. Some of this seems to me to be politically correct conversation, but the real heart isn't there. And so in order to get the heart to be there, we have to align that with the financial incentives, in my view, to the extent that is possible.
And what about this issue here? Board roles. You're on Estée Lauder, you're on DreamWorks. It sounds fascinating, very different from asset management. You're a busy woman. Why do you do these roles?
If I can just answer one last part about that. It's not just at the top. I tell people, invite people in your life who don't look like you, who don't think like you, who don't come from where you come from. And all of us have those moments. It could be at a school meeting. It could be, what are we demanding of our children's schools? I had a friend who had a child at a school in America, and I went to the graduation, and there were no kids of color in this school, and this individual was extraordinarily successful. And I said to him, how do you have your kid go to a school where there's no diversity? And he said, well, we can't get diversity and this, that, and the other. And I said, this isn't even a good education. It isn't. So, it's this elite private school that has no diversity. That's not a good education. So you as a parent who's giving lots of money to this school could demand diversity.
Right.
You have that power. Use your power for good. When you're hiring someone at work, you could be the person to say, I want my whole department not to look like this. I want to invite someone else in. Or you could encourage your colleagues or be the one to raise the resumes that look different. to the question about the boards that I'm on, they make me a better business person. They make Ariel a better investor because I get to be inside of other companies and see what is going on in the world. And that could be everything from consumer spending to governance to political issues around the world. I get a front row seat. And that is amazing.
And that's why you do it?
I love the board work. I do it because I learn a lot, and I do it because I sit with really smart people. Really, really smart.
Well, I'm sure they say the same thing. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Mellody Hobson.
Thank you very much.